patriarchy, that's a whole other subject, but basically after the great flood of Noah, all kingdoms, maybe Zep-Tepi, Egypt, was in equality. The balance of the divine male and the divine female were in balance. And then went over to the male side years ago in every society I can figure out. And so these round tables are probably mostly men. Maybe they have a woman now. I don't know. But who those round tables answer to or have on their boards, if you ask me, is E.T. involved? I think E.T.'s always been involved. Whether they look just like us or, you probably couldn't tell. I've been told that, E.T.'s walk the hall of the Pentagon in uniform. You'd never know who they were. They looked just like us.
So are you saying a human ET hybrid or 100% ET?
Both. If you're a higher dimensional ET,
yeah,
whether you're positive or regressive or everything in between, they're all in the mix because we're living a duality. It stands to reason that you can project a holographic image of yourself as anything you want, because maybe you look a lot different. Let's just say you're a tiger-headed being from Lyra or whatever. That might upset some people. So you want to look like a handsome man or a handsome tall blonde woman like yourself. Maybe Laura's an ET. It stands to reason. If you look back in history, very curious. You have all the animal-headed gods of Egypt, the Thoth, Hermes, Trismegistus. All these animal-headed people, and then you have the cynocephalus of the Middle Ages, the dog-headed men, and they're portrayed as either a soldier or a grain trader. It's like it's no big deal. I think the ET involvement in humanity, it became a big deal somewhere after the Renaissance, somewhere after that. And they were like, no, let's not be in public anymore with the tiger head or the bird head or the whatever you are. Yeah. And let's blend in. And I think they blended in with us. And they're trying to, some are greedy and regressive, and most of them, these are the angels and demons and cherubs and everything you see on the wall. My favorite is the halo. We're back in medieval art. Everyone's like, oh, that's a holy person.
Right.
Oh,
no.
I had some interesting meeting with people 15 years ago, and they laughed at me, and they were like, no. That meant the people who were elite bloodline, doesn't mean you're rich or anything, just an elite bloodline, who still had psychic, psionic, and telekinesis powers.
Yeah.
And so you could talk to the dragons or the cynocephalus or whatever, but these were the elite people, the priest caste, the royal caste. Remember, all these paintings and images and tapestries, they were for the elites only to view. Now we have them all over the internet, but the people weren't allowed in castles. They were allowed in churches sometimes, but they were taught, that's St. John, St. John the Weird, he's a holy man. Saint Laura, she's a good person. And the halo, and that's why these crowns, these gold and gems are used in high-tech industry. So it's gold. And they're conductors and transformers of energies.
Yeah.
And so the word is all those crowns and tiaras and other things. They helped the generations starting the Dark Ages, I suppose, which just meant the Dark Ages were the age of ignorance. The church took over. In the East, it wasn't Dark Ages, but they didn't want that philosophy coming over. So it's very interesting, all this stuff, when you start to learn the scams of history, and you're like, aha, I knew it. And it's like, I'm not saying religious people are bad. Most of them are good people. I know most of my friends, great people. But it's like, boy, have we been scammed through history. And my dad would always say, oh, damn it, you're a cynic. Stop being so cynical. And then later on in life, he was like, uh-oh, you were right about something.
I mentioned in the introduction your book series, Little Anton, and when I was reading about it, among many other things in those books, you incorporate the divine feminine
Yeah.
and ancient Sumerian history.
Yep.
So that was lost, and that's something that Jung talked about. That
Yep.
missing fourth, the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and Mary is the missing fourth, and not the virginal Mary, but the whole Mary, the feminine, both sides, all sides.
It's all symbolism. It's like Christianity. You can trace that back to solar cults in Roman times, and Mithraism. Mr. Mithra had 12 apostles too, and of course 12 is the sacred in the universe. 3, 6, 9, and 12. That's why we have 12 months of the year. 12 everything. It's a sacred number, and so the holy trifecta. You see the Celtic cross or the Templar cross. Well, a lot of the people in metaphysics believe that the universe cosmos came into creation through sound and vibration. And the Templar cross, the Celtic cross, is a symbol, a three-dimensional cymatic symbol of that sound. That's why in the Bible it says, in the beginning, there was the Word, and the Word was God. Something like that. And the Word was sound. Because, and the divine feminine is all our friends out there, and there are other mystics and other people. The universe has a feminine vibration. Everything beats in the universe with a frequency and vibration. And it's a feminine creational. And that's why I have a problem with patriarchal father god religions. Those are disinformation. Sorry.
Yeah.
The divine feminine and the divine male means equality, balance. Go back to Zeb Tepe, Egypt, the king and queen in balance. And so the divine feminine was lost. And of course, the Church of Rome, I'm sorry, folks, it's just true.
Yeah.
The Inquisitions were all about burning witches, because they called the women druids witches. Now, the women druids were very powerful amongst the pagan religions and Celts and the other cultures, because they embodied this creational cosmic force. They can create a human being. Men are just dumb. We're just dumb men. And so the divine male is there to give balance to the female. And so the church was like, oh, no, let's get rid of that. And so they had the Inquisitions, and they hunted and burned witches. Now, what's our legacy from that? Women are treated as second-class citizens in most cultures around the world. Glass ceilings, you name it. Oh, it's just a woman. Why do we always see mostly men as leaders? We still haven't had a woman president in the United States.
Yeah.
It's unconscionable because, in my view, the deep state is mostly patriarchal still.
A human society, a civilization, is more like a plant than a machine. With a plant, if you wanted to go somewhere, you train it that way. You lead it. You don't cut it off at the root and stick it on a wall because that's where you want it to go. It'll just die and fall off. And we can't make these things, these plants, do what they don't want to do. But what we can do is kill them. A gardener, as I often say, can't make a plant, can't even make a plant grow, can only just allow a plant to flourish or not. And at the moment, we're not allowing that wonderful flowering of a civilization, of culture, of society. Instead, we're killing it. I believe that there are many causes of the crisis that we're in now, some of them economic, some of them political, some of them sociological, and it has many aspects. So I'm not saying it's the brain that causes the crisis we're in, but the brain has become hijacked in a way by the way we're thinking now, and that's important for us to realize. Why is the brain divided at all? If it's this supercomputer, why waste computing power by dividing it into two chunks in this way? I don't believe it is a computer, by the way. I can tell you half a dozen reasons why it's not like a computer, but nonetheless, why is it divided? Why is it asymmetrical? and why for most of the history of the brain has there been no band of fibers connecting them. It was a mammalian invention. The corpus callosum is called a body of fibers at the base of the brain that connects the two hemispheres. But the divided brain goes back millions of years, hundreds of millions of years, and the asymmetry of the brain goes back to the very earliest neural networks. Why? And the answer to this is simple in a way, at least I think, and nobody's suggested anything that goes near it in explaining why we have this arrangement, and nobody suggested I'm wrong to say this. It stems from a Darwinian problem of survival. How do you pay narrow attention to something that you need to manipulate, to something you need to pick up? If you're a bird, get that seed quickly. If you're a predator, to catch your prey. If you want to pick up sticks or fashion tools, you've got to have this very manipulative cast of mind in which you're going to target that, whatever it is that you know is important to you, in detail. And that requires a very focused, narrow beam attention. If that's the only kind of attention you pay, then you will end up being someone else's lunch while you're getting your own, because you need to be on the lookout for predators, you need to be on the lookout for your conspecifics, for your mate, for your offspring, that also need to be protected and fed. So the only way in which you can pay these two kinds of attention at once is to have two neuronal masses, each capable of disposing a kind of attention to the world. One narrow, targeted, piecemeal, the other uncommitted, broad, sustained, and vigilant. Now, that may not sound like a big deal, but the fact that there's a different way of attending changes everything, because how you attend governs what you find. And so effectively, these two ways of attending to the world build completely different images, takes, whatever you like to call them, of the world in our minds. I hesitate over image because it makes it sound it's just visual, but I mean in every modality. And what are these differences? Well, there are about a dozen of them that are isolable. But let me just say this. In the left hemisphere, the world seems to be made up of little bits that have no context, no meaning. They're isolated, atomistic. And if they have any meaning at all, it's because we put them together in some way for some purpose of our own. They're abstracted from their embodied nature, from their physical context, relatively devoid of any kind of meaning, including emotional or spiritual meaning. And what you have there is a pretty much an inanimate and mechanical world, a dead world. The right hemisphere, on the other hand, sees the broad picture, and it sees that everything is ultimately connected with everything else. That unlike these fixed frames of the left hemisphere, everything can be seen to be in constant movement. Nothing ever stops moving in the entire universe. It sees that everything is what it is only in the context that it's in. So once you've isolated it, you've lost most of its meaning. It sees that, for example, the animals and the people that we see around us are embodied, and that's a very important part of their nature. It sees the inner life. It sees what is implicit, whereas the left hemisphere sees only the explicit. As a result, the left hemisphere doesn't understand things like tone of voice, facial expressions, bodily gestures, puns, metaphors, myths, narratives, rites, rituals, anything that isn't just the kind of thing you could teach a machine by putting in a word box and a kind of syntax box. It doesn't really get. And it's also super confident that it's right. In fact, because it knows so very little, it thinks it knows everything. There's something in psychology, I'm sure you know, called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which dictates that the less you know, the more you think you know. And the right hemisphere, however, sees a great deal and has arranged things so that it can farm out the mere procedural work to the left hemisphere so that it doesn't get distracted from its job of seeing the overall picture. So these two work very well in harmony, as long as the left hemisphere observes its role as an adjunct to the right hemisphere. It sees less, but it can do certain things very quickly in a way that a PC can. I mean, the PC doesn't know what you know. You put data in, it doesn't understand them. It spews stuff out, it doesn't understand it. You do the understanding. The PC just does it quickly. And the left hemisphere is like, as I say, I resist the idea that the brain is a computer, but just for this purposes of this metaphor, the left hemisphere is like the personal PC of the right hemisphere, that is the one that we can trust because it's more in touch with reality in every respect. And so I expound that to begin with in The Master and His Emissary, and I do it at greater length in the first part of The Matter with Things. In the second part of The Master and His Emissary, I say, how has this changed, if it has changed, over the course of Western civilization? Because I see that around us, we seem to be very much living in a world of the kind that the left hemisphere sees, unsophisticated, untempered by what the right hemisphere could teach us. So has it always been like this? And my answer to that is no. Over the history of the West, there have been 3 points at which civilization seemed to embody the best of the two working together fruitfully. And I'd say these moments are around the 6th century BC in ancient Greece, around the year dot in Rome, and around the 14th, 15th century, the beginning of the Renaissance in Europe. And at those moments, we see something flourishing in the arts, in the sciences, everywhere, because these hemispheres are feeding one another. But in every case, after a period of time, things seem to fossilize. They become more mechanical, more hierarchical, more stereotyped, more bureaucratic, more legalistic. And the imaginative part that helps us see and understand the world we live in begins to erode, and the civilization collapses. It collapsed in Greece, it collapsed in Rome, and it's collapsing for us now, I believe. In The Matter with Things, I do a little bit more. I look more at the philosophical implications of this. So I look at the way what neurology can teach us about the hemispheres, what philosophy can teach us about the hemispheres, and what physics can tell us about the world that we live in. And I find that these 3 parts lead from very different starting points to the same picture of the world, which is very close to the one the right hemisphere has, of something that is never fixed and certain, that is always evolving, that is in process, that is complex, beautiful, rich, interconnected, animate, rather than the dead world of mechanistic reductionism. So that's it in a nutshell. There's a lot more to say, but you can ask me if you're interested.
The left brain puts the bits together and creates a narrative that suits us, right? So it uses the left brain in kind of a internal authority bias sort of way and dominates the narrative, which could explain why there's so many people that are cocksure that they understand the world, and that it gives people like a overly self-confident because it helps themselves in their own fitness.
I think the left hemisphere envisages only the sort of thing it can know. It knows how to put things together and make something. And so it decides that the world must be made like that from little bits. And in doing so, it completely misunderstands its nature, and it produces that kind of cocksure certainty, which is surely the sign of a lack of wisdom. One of the signs of wisdom is that one feels less certain that one knows rather than more certain that one knows in general. Would be that just about every People's Republic of whatever, in its zeal for republicanism and freedom, has created a tyranny in which the people are subjected to the most draconian control. And I think there are variations of this going on now in the politics of the public sphere, in politics in the more sort of Twitter sphere, and I don't think we understand the way in which the beautiful and the ugly can come together. By too much pursuing one, we can find the other, and they're never completely apart. The good and the bad. There are things that we think this just is good, but there's nothing that just is good. Things are good only in a context. When you take them out of the context or push them too far, things become unbalanced. They fall out of harmony. And as in music, you get a terrible discord. So I think this is an idea we could do with taking on board in our modern world.
One of the things that I find interesting is you've been working at this for a long time, and you suggested that your intuition around this lack of intuition and I guess a view of quite a sterile view of the world, that this has been something that's been bubbling under the surface for yourself for a long time, which means it must have existed before you started working on it. And yet,
yes.
I don't know, it feels like a lot of the problems that we see that might have been around for a long time are quite easy to drop at the feet of big tech or of the super modern era, last 10 to 30 years, something like that. But it seems like this is obviously a problem which has been going on for much longer than that.
Yes, it is. And in my earlier book, The Master and His Emissary, which came out in 2009, so 12 and a half years ago now, the second half of the book, I look through the history of the Western world, looking at the way in which the balance between the take on the world of the two hemispheres, we haven't really talked about that yet, but let me go straight to that the brain is divided. Of course, the two hemispheres work together, but they also attend to the world in a different way and know and understand quite different things. And once you see that, you can begin to see what happens when things get out of balance, out of kilter. And there seems to be a tendency in civilization to begin, interestingly, rather well balanced, and then to go out of balance further and further in the direction of privileging the left hemisphere, which, spoiler alert, is the less intelligent, the less perceptive, the less insightful of the two, which doesn't make it pointless or bad. It just means it ought to know its place and not try to be the master, as in the narrative, the myth that the title "The Master and His Emissary" comes from. So yes, I think it does go back much further, but technology is a very interesting special case. You can talk about technology going back thousands of years, or you can talk about the first smelting of iron being technology and so on. That's true in a way. But with many technologies, and I think we see that very clearly now, there is something marvelous in the technology up to a certain point, but by extending it further and further, we don't necessarily make it better. We actually may make things considerably worse. I mean, there are everyday examples of this, that as machines, it becomes de rigueur for a producer of a washing machine or whatever it is to put more and more and more controls on it. It gets actually harder to use it. And cars now are so overburdened with electronic gizmos and gadgets that it's often very hard actually to control your own car the way you would like it. It's so complex and so difficult to finesse that in fact a much simpler car would be a much better thing to be driving. So I mean, that's just obviously on a very simple level, but I think technology is no more nor less than the extension of human control. That's exactly what technology is. And obviously, to some degree, to have some control over what happens around one is a good thing. Although, even there, the philosophy that you can sort things out and you ought to be in control of them, rather than, I think, a wiser idea that you take what comes to you and take the advantages out of it, rather than resisting it and trying to make it into something it isn't. But in any case, to go back to what I was saying, technology is the extension of human power to control the environment, society, people. And this is neither in itself good nor bad, I would say, although it ought to give rise to a little bit of fear in any case. But it's how it's used and to what end. And to have a sudden proliferation of the capacity to control, perhaps destroy nature and humanity, without any commensurate increase in wisdom is a huge problem for us. I don't notice us getting wiser. In fact, I'd be prepared to say that this is probably the least wise civilization of which we have any record.
How would you define wisdom?
I wouldn't necessarily define it at all. I think there are certain things, if you don't know them when you see them, a definition is not going to help you. And indeed, that, of course, is the left hemisphere's idea. Well, let's get this cut and dried and clear at the outset. So what is the soul? What is meant by God? What is, etc. Now, the point is that in areas of very real experience that we all respond to, there are things for which we don't have terms that can be simply defined. But to ignore them just because we don't have those terms is extremely dangerous. But let me not dodge your problem, if I can in any way begin to answer it. I think what I'd say, it's the capacity to balance many different ways in which we come to know something about the world and not be simply under the sway of one of them. So in the middle of the book, I look at science, reason, intuition, and imagination as probably the four ways that most people would come up with for saying, how do we get to know something about reality? How do we get to know anything that's truer than anything else? And I think my conclusion there is that we've lost the balance. We think that one of these, or two at the most, can answer all our questions, and they can't. We need to bring to bear a number of different strands of knowledge in order to have wisdom. And I won't go into the detail, but in Greek, there were 4 or 5 important words for knowledge, and there was also separately wisdom, Sophia, and they showed an enormous sophistication in their understanding of what these things were. But nowadays, we seem to think that if something is rationalistic in the way that a computer could follow it, then we've achieved a full understanding of something. But that actually very rarely leads to a full understanding. Indeed, there is a condition in which people can only reach conclusions by reasoning about them, not by experience and not by intuition. And it's not that rare. It's called schizophrenia. And schizophrenia is, of course, the archetypal example of what used to be called madness. And we used to say that people, when they were mad, lost their reason. But in fact, as has been pointed out, schizophrenia is not a condition in which people have lost their reason, but have lost everything but their reason. And they can only come to conclusions on a rational basis. So a thought comes into their head from their unconscious, so they don't remember giving rise to it. So somebody must be beaming thoughts into my head. They hear a sound in the coming from the other side of the wall, and they think somebody is there bugging me and so on. This is entirely rational, but it is actually completely unlikely. And the problem is they have no sense from experience and from intuition of what we should understand. I will stop this, but I just want to make this point before doing so. Intuition has had a very bad rap lately because some clever and entertaining psychologists pointed out that quite often it's mistaken, which it is. As I pointed out, quite often reasoning can lead you to very mistaken conclusions. If you lead your life only by reasoning, you'll be a very strange person. Things won't work well. But these occasions on which intuition doesn't work are much rarer than we think. I make the comparison with optical illusions, which are fascinating. And sometimes you can hardly believe your eyes, as we say. But I don't know anyone who, after seeing a really good optical illusion, said, that does it. From now on, I'm going to live my life with my eyes shut. No, because most of the time, your eyes are doing a bloody good job. And the same is true of intuition. And one point that is worth just finishing on here is that if we have to argue explicitly and rationally for a conclusion only, we can express only one line of thinking. Whereas in intuition, we may bring together simultaneously and balance, without even having to work through it explicitly, many strands of knowledge the wisdom that we have gathered from experience. And it's been argued, and I very much support this, that decision makers who are at the head of important corporations, whether private or governmental, should be encouraged to use their intuition instead of reducing their intelligence by following programmatic algorithms.
I agree. This is a tension that I've been feeling in myself and talking to friends about. It's very interesting when you have a conversation that continues to crop up in different circumstances, and it's always got this single thread that ties them all together. And one of the most common ones that I'm seeing at the moment is a tension between cognition and intuition. That maybe it's because of the age I'm at as well, in early 30s, a lot of the solutions that me and my friends found to problems throughout our 20s was to apply cerebral horsepower to it, right? That I'm going to just use more thinking, and I'm going to think myself through this problem. And then you realize that maybe that was a good tool that got you across one river, but you're now trying to carry that boat across land to then get you something next. And what's next for a lot of us, I think, is trying to feel and find more grace and play and being able to aggregate all of the experience that we've got. And this maybe makes sense, actually, because when you're first starting out at something, you need to be more deliberate because you don't have that intuition to fall back on. And yet now,
exactly,
the situation that I'm finding myself in increasingly is I'm trying to switch off that rational thinking brain. I'm trying to utilize as much intuition as I can.
Well, I mean, obviously it's a commonplace that that young people are more certain than their elders, and are certain because they've worked it all out. I mean, in the old days, people used to go to university in order to learn from people who were perhaps 3 times their age, had thought and read an enormous amount. But nowadays, they go in order to tell those older people what they should be thinking and what they should be saying. Well, this seems to me to be would be very funny if it weren't so completely tragic. It's destroying our society. So yes, as we get older, we realize that there's far more to it than anything that can be just worked out like a logical puzzle. So yes, our intuitions are terribly, terribly important. And one of the things that used to be part of education was teaching people, not in a, I hope, in such a way as to suppress their interest in making something new, but to enable them to make something new, which was the history of their culture, if you like, the tradition. Now, I mean, unfortunately, we now think of tradition as clearly must be wrong.
Silly explanations of people that didn't know what was happening.
Didn't know enough and so on. And so we can dispense with all that. But the trouble is that when you do, you become very rudderless and rather foolish. And the things you come up with are not interesting or helpful innovations. The point I would like to make is that tradition, knowing the tradition, is the only way in which you can evolve to something new. Traditions are always changing. A tradition is like a river. A river is, as it were, always there. The water in it is changing all the time, and it's moving on. So this process is what we have as a society. Once we throw out all of it, we negate it, we rubbish it, we have all kinds of more or indeed less sophisticated thoughts about it, then we lose the capacity for something to evolve as intrinsic to the coming together of mind and matter, which seems to me a business of attending to the world, particularly to the natural world. It's easier to become divorced from one's body, oddly, in a city, which is a very material place, because there's something about nature, that we know this from research now, that is absolutely incontrovertible, that spending time in nature is enormously important to spiritual well-being, physical well-being, cognitive well-being, and that people deprived of it become angry, short-tempered, don't think straight, are miserably unhappy. So, I mean, the nature is our home, and that is where mind and matter are most obviously together. which explains why I very inconveniently live on a lump of rock off the northwest coast of Scotland.
String theory says everything is vibrating at the subatomic level, which means that strings with the same vibrational pattern and frequency are in sync. A disturbance of the vibration pattern of a string in sync with another might cause the other string to shift its pattern to match it, or the second string might help the disturbed string regroup and resume its original pattern. This latter effect would be more likely when there are fewer disturbed strings than strings with the original pattern. So, resonance at the level of strings may help maintain the integrity of objects and beings over time, because they can serve as a template or restorative memory. According to SSTs, strings are the basic subatomic units that constitute everything, including genes and the physical characteristics coded for by those genes. Because of resonance, all of us are potentially responsive to others with a very similar makeup. This obviously means that resonance occurs at the subatomic level among members of the same species, since they share many of the same genes and physical characteristics. Resonance would also occur to some degree across species, since animals all share many of the same genes. The closer we are to each other genetically, the higher our degree of subatomic resonance. Since all of the genetic material of identical twins is the same, they have an extremely high degree of resonance. But this resonance may not just come from their identical genes. Unless their junk DNA underwent mutations after separation of the fertilized egg, it would also be identical. Junk DNA actually comprises 98% of the inherited DNA in our chromosomes, but it isn't considered part of the genome because it doesn't have genes. Its function is unknown, but it could provide a large capacity for resonance between us and our close relatives. In other words, it can contain mutations that are inconsequential as far as disease is concerned, but shared mutations may contribute to overall resonance. The influence of like upon like in resonance requires more than just sharing the same resonance frequency. It also requires a medium that connects them. Vibration creates a wave, but only if the wave has a medium for transmission. Air is the medium for sound waves that allows the transfer of vibration from one tuning fork to another. You can feel the tuning fork's effect on air by placing your hand near the fork when it is vibrating. Another example is the ripples in a pond, which need water to propagate their waves. But over long distances, air has too much resistance or drag to act as a possible medium between objects. Resistance causes signals to dissipate, which is one reason cell phone technology requires a network of towers to provide continuous service. So, what medium could allow people to be in resonance with each other at long distances? The most likely answer is that it is the same as light's medium. Light is an electromagnetic wave. So scientists expected starlight to have a medium that allowed its transmission through space. This theoretical medium was called ether. In 1887, the Michelson-Morley experiment was done to detect ether, and its results were shocking. Scientists found no resistance or friction in space. Because resistance was a characteristic of all the known media for wave transmission, the experimental results were interpreted as proof that ether didn't exist and that space was a vacuum or complete nothingness. That interpretation of space changed when scientists investigated what would happen if they took away all the matter from a defined space and brought its temperature down to absolute zero, which is the lowest possible energy state. What remained was called the zero-point field, ZPF, which was a concept first proposed by Albert Einstein and Otto Stern in 1913. Because of the Michelson-Morley experiment, scientists had expected the ZPF to be a vacuum. But, to their surprise, they discovered in 1948 that it contained a tremendous amount of energy. The energy was so great that the famous physicist Richard Feynman said, "The energy in a single cubic meter of space is enough to boil all of the oceans of the world." The ZPF became equated with the original concept of ether as the ever-present field that forms the backdrop of the universe. In this context, scientists are using field to mean a matrix that connects everything. The concept of fields originated with James Clerk Maxwell and Michael Faraday, who defined a field as a disturbance or condition in space that has the potential of producing a force. In other words, space can contain information that organizes or directs whatever interacts with it. The ZPF is everywhere and in everything because our universe is primarily space. Although the objects in our universe appear to be solid, they are far from being solid. Empty space is 99.9999999% of an atom. So the nucleus of an atom takes up as much room in the atom as an ant on a football field. The ZPF is like a vacuum only in that it has no resistance or friction. This means that waves transmitted in the ZPF don't fade and disappear, the way ripples in pond water do. ZPF is an ideal medium for light, but it is also ideal for resonance between strings, since there is no distortion in its signals. The vibration patterns of strings have the potential to go on perpetually, because the ZPF doesn't have the friction to stop them. David Bohm. Other evidence that the universe is interconnected comes from the work of David Bohm, who was working on plasma at the radiation laboratory in Berkeley, California in 1943. Plasma is a phase of matter entirely distinct from solids, liquids, and gases. It is a state in which negatively charged electrons have been stripped from their atoms. We rarely interact with it, but plasma is actually the majority of visible matter. It is used for flat panel video displays, plasma screens, but is also what many stars are made of. When electrons are no longer attached to atoms, they behave very differently. Electrons normally repel each other because they are negatively charged. Like charges repel and opposite charges attract. But Bohm saw the plasma electrons join each other and act collectively rather than as individuals. Plasma is sometimes called an ionized gas, which differs from an ordinary gas. Atoms in normal gases move about randomly, whereas plasma electrons behave in an orderly fashion, as if they are part of an interconnected whole. Bohm's observations made him comment that it was as though the electrons were alive. He concluded that something other than the four known physical forces was determining the precise path they followed. In physics, the four forces are electromagnetism, gravity, and the weak and strong forces involved in the integrity of an atom's structure. In 1959, Bohm and a research assistant, Yakir Aronoff, observed the movement of plasma electrons under the influence of magnetic fields. Surprisingly, the electrons behaved differently depending upon whether there was a nearby magnetic field, even when the electrons were in a place where the magnetic field's strength was 0 and shouldn't have affected them. Somehow the electrons received information about the magnetic field. That led Bohm to propose that an unknown fifth force field provided information about the whole environment. He defined it as a field that exists at the deepest level, pervades all of space, and is equally powerful everywhere, unlike gravitational and magnetic fields, which weaken with distance. His description of this force field sounds like it may be the same as the ZPF, or at least a component of the ZPF. Bohm also compared the universe to a giant flowing hologram, constantly moving and evolving. Holograms are images created artificially by...
Well, you know, when I gave that TED talk, I had already defined myself as completely recovered. And that went out into the world, and the whole world got introduced to Jill Bolte Taylor at that level. And so Ted and I was the first TED talk that ever went viral on the internet. So Ted and I kind of got famous together, and that was exciting and interesting. But for me, it was a miss, because I wanted people to walk away from that TED talk in awe of themselves and what they are as a biological creature. And instead what happened was people were in awe of me. And it was a miss. That wasn't my goal. My goal was to help people realize they have the power to choose moment by moment who and how they want to be, and that they have these awesome parts of who they are, and they can get to know these different parts of who they are, and then have the power to choose. So it took me until 2021 to publish book number 2. I never thought I'd publish book number 2. I never thought I'd have anything more to say, but what it does, Whole Brain Living, the anatomy of choice, and the 4 characters that drive our life, is all about helping people differentiate 4 different parts of who they are. 2 different emotional parts, 1 in each hemisphere, and 2 thinking groups of cells, 1 in each hemisphere. And when you get to know each of those 4 groups of cells, then you can choose in any moment, because you know what your choices are. And you can't choose if you don't know what your options are, which is why people may meditate for 20 years and never feel that experience of blissful euphoria, because they don't know where they're going. And what Whole Brain Living does was it gives them a framework of getting to know this part of who you are. And then once you do that, then you can choose to embody that part by choice.
How can we go about becoming more consciously aware of all 4 of our characters?
Well, I encourage them to read Whole Brain Living. Whole Brain Living is a one of a kind. This is a framework that marries the neuroanatomy, underlying neuroanatomical cells, with what those cells do. And thinking cells think, emotional cells emote or experience or experiential. But there are big differences between what the right brain does and what the left brain does. So, for example, then the right emotion, which is right here, right now, is more experiential. What does it feel like to be in this body? What does it feel like to dive into water and feel the pressure of the water and the temperature of the water and literally wetness of the water? What does that experience? Where the left hemisphere emotional tissue actually steps out of the consciousness of the present moment, and it takes the information from the present moment and compares it to our past experience to determine, am I in danger or threat in the present moment? So we have these 2 very different instruments inside of our brain and how they process information so that we can be a whole human. And the better we get to know those 4 characters, then we can bring them into conversation with one another and it's a democracy. It's like, well, who do we want to be right here, right now, and have a negotiation with the other parts so that we never experience personal conflict because we're in communication with ourselves. There's 4 different personalities inside of me that are very predictable based on the skill sets. And you have the exact same 4 characters based on the anatomy of your brain. And we all have 4 characters. Then I have my own 4 that I need to work with and let them get to know one another. But in any interpersonal relationship, that means there's 8 of us. And so we might find that some parts of our brain get along really well. But there are certain parts of ourselves that we just don't know how to navigate in a healthy way, because when you're in your unhappy, triggered self, it's my automaticity. I automatically become emotionally triggered as well. And we will never find a resolution until someone steps out of that triggered emotional part of who we are in order to hold the space in a different way. So what whole brain living does is it gives us a roadmap to our own peace of mind. And when we have that inside of ourselves and we understand the 4 characters in the other person, then I can strategize your 4 characters very differently, because I have gained the power then to have choice in who and how I want to be in relationship with you.
To set the stage, can you also just briefly describe what each character represents?
Yeah. Character 1 is the left thinking tissue in our brain, left thinking, and that's our rational brain. It defines the boundaries of where I begin and end. It is my individuation, my identity as an individual. I have a past, I have a future. It defines what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad. It likes to control people, places, and things. It's our alpha type personality. And it likes to be the boss in most of us. So that's left thinking. Left emotion, again, has a past and a future. So these cells step out of the present moment, compare the present moment to our past experience, and our past experience is where all of our emotional trauma from our childhood is. So this is where our trauma from the past is. So it may be angry. It's also our fight or flight. Autonomic nervous system with the amygdala and the hippocampus. It's all of our addiction tissue right there in the left insular cortex. Wipe that out and people don't have addiction anymore. It's really very interesting. So character 2 is kind of our it's a little person inside of ourselves, one of the children that never matures inside of ourselves, and it's kind of always looking for a reason to push away and say, no, I don't want more of that in my life. It's designed to protect us. It also is necessary for us to grow because it learns from past experience. So we have to have this little character 2 part of who we are in order to learn and grow. I call character 3 is the emotional tissue in the right hemisphere. And the right hemisphere, it's right here, right now. So in that emotional, it's more experiential, as I described, like diving into water. So it's that playful, it's creative, it's open, it's expansive, it's entrepreneurial, it's adventurous, because it doesn't define what's right, wrong, good, and bad. It just is what it is, and it's going to color anything, any color it wants, because it can. And it wants to try, whatever it is. And then character 4 is the thinking tissue of that right hemisphere. And this is the part of us that is just connected to all that is. It's good with whatever. It's looking at and observing facial language. It's observing body language. It's listening and hearing intonation of voice. It's having the experience of life, but it's good with whatever is. It's simply this beautiful divine piece of ourselves, and it's all knowing and all present and grateful to be alive. And this is a consciousness that is infused in every cell of our body. It's the energy of the universe that has infused itself into our life form now. And it's the big picture perspective of our life. But the biggest piece of that big picture perspective is I'm a living being. I'm alive and I'm made up from a single cell, and that single cell multiplied and divided itself inside the womb at a rate of 250,000 cells per second. And it's this big energy ball of consciousness around these cells that make up this magnificent organism that we all are. So it's the part of us that is more our, well, a lot of people think of it as our divine self or our higher self or our self that is connected to something that is greater than we are. It's like the portal through which our consciousness moves when we pray or when we have awe and celebration in gratitude in the present moment.
Everything has a spirit. In the observations of contemporary hunter-gatherer peoples reveal that they view the world from an animist perspective. Animism is the spiritual framework that understands that physical beings, including animals, plants, and even inanimate objects, landscape features and phenomena, possess a spirit or animating essence. This cultural construct is intimately connected to the hunter-gatherer lifestyle. By viewing everything as alive, hunter-gatherers recognize that all of the elements of the landscape are co-participants in the workings of life. Spirit is at the foundation of everything. It is what makes all aspects of our physical existence possible. It is the framework on which physical existence is sustained. Shamanism is a widely practiced spiritual tradition. While the forms this tradition takes are many, the root of the tradition is the practice of negotiating harmony with the spirits by fostering relationships with them. The shaman knows that we are surrounded by sentient beings who can offer their wisdom, guidance, perspectives, and healing power in support of human life. In return for these gifts, the people offer their respect and nurturance to the spirits. This mutually respectful and honorific interaction is the basis for shamanic culture. We can suppose that since our most ancient ancestors lived a hunting and gathering existence, they also had similar spiritual worldviews to those contemporary hunter-gatherer groups, that is, that they practice some form of shamanism. A shaman is someone who intentionally traverses the boundary of physical reality. This is done to better interact with the numinous beings that enliven nature. While spirits are nearly impossible to see or hear with our ordinary senses, the shaman is able to interact with these beings easily by moving beyond their ordinary way of perceiving the world. The shaman enters the realm of the spirits by expanding consciousness. This intentional journey between the ordinary and non-ordinary realms is what defines a shaman and is the source of her or his strength, power, and ability to solve community problems. The shaman's altered state of consciousness, or trance, may be induced through several time-honored methods. These can include sensory or physical deprivation, meditation, or by the use of repetitive sensory stimuli such as intensive prolonged dancing, rattling, chanting, flickering lights, or drumming. Indeed, trance states and shamanism are intimately connected. James L. Pearson does an excellent job of connecting these dots in his book Shamanism and the Ancient Mind, when he writes about the etymology of the words trance and shaman. He wrote that the word trance derives from the Latin transitus, meaning a passage, and that the verb root is transive, meaning, quote, to pass over. Following this logic, he suggests that the word trance refers to entering another world. He further added that the term shaman, from the Tungus Mongol word saman, is both a noun and a verb. The Indo-European root sa means both, quote, to know, and, quote, one who is excited, moved, raised. Through these linguistic explorations, Pearson determined that a shaman is, by definition, one who attains an ecstatic state and, furthermore, that entering a trance state is a prerequisite for shamanism. Michael Winkelmann suggests that shamanism is endemic to nomadic hunting and gathering cultures. Indeed, evidence in the form of both portable objects and paintings on cave walls does support the idea that shamanism was prevalent across Europe during this time period. The abstract patterns from Upper Paleolithic cave walls, such as dots, wavy lines, spirals, and concentric circles, are consistent with entopic imagery, or visions that one sees during the early stages of a trance state. In his book, Shamanism and the Ancient Mind, James L. Pearson also agrees that the universal neurological and psychological experiences that result from altered states experiences help to explain art that was created to either literally portray or suggest the shamanic trance state. Apparently, we are wired for altered consciousness experiences. A study published in 1973 found that altered states of consciousness are virtually universal in their distribution across human societies. The study sampled 488 societies and found that fully 90% of those sampled groups exhibit institutionalized, culturally patterned forms of altered states of consciousness. The study also included that the capacity to experience an altered state of consciousness was so universal that it seems to be part of the psychobiological heritage of our species. Mike Williams, PhD, in his book, Prehistoric Belief, is even more straightforward in his clarity about our ancestors' spiritual worldview, suggesting that people in prehistory were very adept at entering trance. During these trance states, they would befriend the spiritual entities they met and treated those beings and the realms that they inhabited as another aspect of life. In other words, our ancestors were comfortable with the understanding that there were otherworldly beings and realms beyond our own. It is his belief that experiencing trance states was not an activity that was only limited to shamans. You see, our Homo sapiens sapiens ancestors had fully modern brains. As such, they were capable of, quote, higher order consciousness, close quote, which is the ability to conceive ideas of past, present, and future, of the dreaming and waking states, and of altering consciousness. Like us, these people were also capable of holding on to the memories of dream and altered consciousness experiences. As a result, this higher order consciousness allows us to remember and relate different experiences of consciousness to our everyday existence. Directly because we humans have this ability, ideas that are born in dreams and visionary states can be used to inform and transform everyday reality. Fire was critical to life in the North. A central fire was a pivot point around which life revolved once the sun's rays vanished into evening. Our ancestors spent their nights clustered around it to draw warmth, light, and comfort from its marvelous flickering. In our contemporary world, it's difficult to imagine the extraordinary darkness of an ancient night. We are so used to artificially illuminating our world. For us, day and night have become blended into each other. It is only in places far from civilization that it is still possible to get a taste of the true darkness. I had such an experience in the hours before dawn while hunting in upstate New York. It was a night without a moon, and the sky was so full of stars that it was impossible to discern any familiar constellations. In that darkness, the old expression of not being able to see your hand in front of your face suddenly became a reality. The darkness was so complete that it was both physically disorienting and emotionally unsettling. How comforting a fire is in such a circumstance. A fire creates a space where we can see and interact with each other. The small illuminated region around the fire becomes our whole world. The edges of the firelight also create a visual boundary. The space that lies beyond the firelight seems even darker. When gazing out into that darkness, our known world seems completely enfolded by another place. When you sit in front of a fire in that deep darkness, the objects and people around you seem to shimmer and move in the flickering light. Firelight produces a stroboscopic effect, where darkness and light alternate rapidly back and forth. The rhythmic rate at which this occurs approximates low alpha and theta wave brain states. This brain activity is consistent with the experience of the shamanic state of consciousness. Since all life revolved around the fire, our ancestors were exposed to the trance-inducing photic driving of firelight every evening of their lives. Altered consciousness is not only natural to our species, we have been doing it for hundreds of thousands of years. This state assists in creating new connections between neurons. In other words, trance assists in rewiring the brain. If this is true, it is not so much that shamanism is a part of our ancient way of relating to the world around us. It is what helped us to understand ourselves, self-awareness, and our relationship with the world, enabled us to remember the past and ponder our future. In other words, trance contributed to creating us as a species. In addition, there are physiological and psychological benefits that occur when individuals enter trance that have been observed by scientists, not the least of which includes a better immune response. Trance is also an excellent problem-solving tool. Indeed, this is so clear that the late anthropologist Michael Harner suggested that voluntary entrance into a shamanic trance, or the shamanic state of consciousness, in a counseling context, is a proven, concrete problem-solving method. Certainly, most people have experienced the spontaneous shift of consciousness that accompanies a mindless, repetitive task, such as spinning wool or listening to a repetitive sound. While this can be disconcerting when it happens unbidden, it can also be very beneficial. When I was a young illustrator, I frequently rode an old diesel commuter train into New York City. Morning and evening, the clickety-clack of the train would lull me into a dreamy trance. During these experiences, I would often receive sudden insight about a current challenge. This method became so useful to me that I learned to use my hours on the train to help me solve creative problems, especially when I was on a tight deadline. Being able to voluntarily enter a trance would have been an invaluable tool for locating game for a community that relied upon seasonal arrivals of migrating animals, birds, and fish. The same would have been true in locating a lost member of the group, finding the reasons for illness, or discovering the right plant remedy to cure it. Indeed, finding any critical information that was hidden from ordinary sight, hearing, or touch could have meant the difference between perishing and surviving for our hunter-gatherer ancestors.
For much of history, scientists have asserted that consciousness belongs only to human beings. Even 100 years ago, it would have sounded preposterous to suggest that animals like horses or dogs were conscious beings. But science and mainstream views change, and animal consciousness is now being studied and widely recognized as real. And if we're able to accept that animals may be conscious, we have to take seriously the possibility that they can communicate. Many of the non-speakers have said that communicating with animals is not only possible, but something they do. And one of them is Trevor, who we briefly introduced to you in the talk tracks.
Trevor has always loved music. We sing every night together. I'd hardly hear him say a word all day long, but then every night we sing about 5 songs.
This is Laura. Her son Trevor is nonverbal and autistic, and she realized that her son was telepathic after listening to season 1 of the telepathy tapes. And it was through music that so much got unlocked for Trevor. But on today's episode, we're focusing on Trevor again for a related but different reason.
We live in Reno, Nevada area, and Trevor always liked horses when he was little. We'd bring him on pony rides, and he'd just be really happy and have this big smile on his face. And then once he graduated from high school, I wanted to have him do some activities, and they have an adaptive riding program here. And this was right around the time he was becoming an open speller. And he rode a few horses, and he met this horse named Blackjack, and he ended up riding Blackjack, and he was his favorite horse. And since the day he started riding Blackjack, he spelled the most beautiful things to me that he and Blackjack talked about during their session. So they're doing a lesson. So from the outside, it looks like they're just learning how to ride and say, whoa, and ride up and do games and stuff. But there was a whole other world going on within them.
Like what?
The 2 main things that blew me away that he spelled were things that nobody told Trevor. One was that on 2 separate occasions, 2 horses died, and Trevor spelled, Blackjack was sad today because Buck died, and nobody told him. And the same thing happened with another horse, Sully. This I found out after the fact, but we went to visit the horses, and he can talk to them telepathically even when he's not riding them. And Blackjack didn't turn around and come over by us. He just stood with his back to us. And I said, what was going on with Blackjack today? And he spelled, Blackjack was mourning because Sully died. And Sully was right next to Blackjack in the stalls. Then I texted my lady that runs the place, and she said, yeah, Sully did die. So I was like, okay, this is totally happening. Another story was the lady that was running the program at the time told my mom and I and the other mother that was there that she was going to have to step down because she was pregnant with triplets. And Trevor was off riding. He was nowhere in earshot of hearing that discussion. And afterward, I spelled with him and I said, "What did you and Blackjack talk about today?" And he spelled, "We talked about Nikki being pregnant with triplets." I go, "How did you know that? Did you overhear us talking?" And he said, "No, Blackjack told me."
Laura has countless stories about Trevor knowing things that he couldn't possibly have known through ordinary ways of knowing. But perhaps one of the most beautiful stories that Laura and Trevor share about Blackjack is when he got older and started to get sick.
He couldn't ride Blackjack for almost a year because he was getting older and he couldn't carry a rider over 100 pounds. But he always talked to him telepathically, and he spelled to me that he could even talk to him when he wasn't there, like from our house. He could talk to him telepathically from anywhere, that they had that connection, and they always still talked to each other, even though he wasn't riding him. Well, Blackjack got cancer and had to be put down on Valentine's Day this past year. And I got a call from somebody because they knew how close Trevor and Blackjack were, and they wanted us to be able to come and say goodbye to him. And I was crying. My mom was crying. We just loved this connection between the two of them. And it broke my heart to think, oh my God, I got to tell him this. So he was sitting down in the car, and I said, "Trevor, I have to tell you something. We're going to see Blackjack because he's got to get put down because he has cancer." And he got the biggest smile on his face and started laughing. And I'm like, why is he happy? So we went to see Blackjack.
So wait, did you find out why he was so happy?
That night, I spelled with him, and I said, "I told you today that Blackjack had to be put down because he has cancer. Did you already know that?" And he spelled, "Yes, Blackjack told me." And I said, "How do you feel about that?" And he said, "I'm okay because he's going home to heaven, and I can ride him every day on the hill." Then he passed on Valentine's Day. I asked Trevor the next day about Blackjack passing, and he said he's on the other side with the herd, the other two horses that passed, and that he is able to ride him on the other side.
And this is the heart of today's episode. The kind of telepathy we've been exploring between people might not be confined to human minds. Many who can connect with other human beings non-locally or via telepathy say they can communicate this way with animals too. And for reasons that I don't fully understand, horses are often the gateway to a lot of this interspecies activity.
I'm Alex Anderson. I am the founder of Pet Talk Communications, and I'm a full-time animal communicator, intuitive, and I also teach people how to learn how to connect with their intuition and really kind of get into the world of animal communication from scratch.
Okay, so your ability to communicate with animals via what I would call telepathy, is it something you were born with, or did something happen?
I had actually had an incident with my horse that really kind of rocked my world, and we had just put out a really huge bale of hay in their pasture, and it was one of the kinds that they're like 800 pounds. They're pretty large, and he took a bite out of the corner of it. I walked away. I was like, "Cool, you snack. We're going to come put a net over this in just a minute." And a few minutes later, he came up to the fence at me, and he looked really lethargic, and he had snot coming out of his nose, and he was not okay. And I had no idea what was going on. I was looking him up and down. I was like, oh my gosh, is he colicking? I've never seen this, even though I've had horses since I was a child. And all of a sudden in my mind, I heard, "I can't breathe," really loud. And yeah, it shook me a bit. And so I was like, "What do you mean?" What do you mean? So I looked it up because I'd never seen a horse choke before. And it definitely did not look how you would think it would look. And called the vet right away, explained the symptoms to him. He said, "Yes, definitely sounds to me like he's choking. Don't panic. Oftentimes they will resolve this on their own. But if you want to be safe than sorry, bring him in." And we did, because I'm a safe than sorry kind of gal. And sure enough, he did have a pretty good blockage in there, and they had to tube him to clear it out. And that was my first experience one-on-one with an animal, that I was like, okay, something's here. And I didn't talk to anybody about it for a little while because it kind of freaked me out. And I was like, people are going to think I'm crazy, like that this just happened. And so I sort of put it to bed and didn't touch it again for a little while. But I did have a little twinge in my mind, like, okay, that sort of happened accidentally, but what if we can learn to do this on purpose with purpose?
Okay, so then what happened next?
I became really obsessed with the brain. And so I went into neurolinguistics and hypnotherapy and became certified in all of those.
Okay, and did your research and studies help you believe that telepathy with animals was possible?
We've got a really, really active conscious mind. right? Animals don't. So that is the flip side to this. This is the most natural form of communication for them. They have been born with it. Nobody's ever told them it's not possible. There's no programming going against them and their ability to do this. They do this with each other all the time.
For some, the idea that animals can communicate telepathically stops being theory the moment it happens to them.
When I hacked upon this about 25 years ago, it was a complete surprise to my logical left brain. I was living and working in Silicon Valley at the time, fully into the mental IT world. And I was finding ways to satisfy my love for nature and animals through volunteering.
This is Anna Breitenbach, one of the world's most well-known interspecies communicators and someone who's made listening across species a daily practice.
When I started doing my tracking training with the Wilderness Awareness School, based out of Washington State, I started to have experiences I couldn't explain.
Tracking teaches you to notice faint clues, like a paw print in the mud or a bent blade of grass, signs of where an animal has moved or rested or hunted. But Anna was picking up something deeper, information that couldn't be explained by sight alone.
Because I grew up in my native South Africa and I didn't have a clue what the North American animals were, much less what their feet or their footprints would look like. And I began getting spontaneous information that would later prove to be true in ways that my mind had no involvement with. It was not a rational or thoughtful process or anything at all. So I thought one of two things is happening. Either I'm just going completely crazy and hallucinating, or there's something to this I need to investigate. I did the latter. I came across the work of Rupert Sheldrake and the entire field of quantum physics and new physics. And in the US, there are hundreds of teachers of animal communication. I carefully chose to embark on studies through the Assisi International Animal Institute because of their three-pronged approach, which was looking very deeply into the physics of it, but also engendering and living from that place of the more Buddhist principles of compassion and reverence for all life. And the third angle in our research was all around the original peoples and how natural this was for them and the ways they used to live and move with their more than human kin, on the earth. Although it does actually literally apply to all species, not just the more than human animals. But we humans come to the party mostly by connecting with other animals and relearning and remembering these skills that are actually our intuition. It's actually part of the blueprint of our brain and how we are designed.
So being that animals don't use, words or language to identify things the way we do, how does animal telepathy work? What does the communication feel like or sound like?
So one way to understand telepathy would be to call it just that, a thought transference, where we have the idea of a sender and a receiver, and perhaps a question and answer based process. But truth be told, that's a bit mechanical, because what's really happening, even though our minds might need that sort of model to step into it and to bring our minds to the party, what's really happening is just a direct knowing in a much more than verbal way, even internally, or much more than a mental imagery way. So like old telepathy experiments and telepathy tests were to, playing cards face down to tell what kind of card it was, and remote viewing and all of these things, of course, they are real. But when we're dealing with another real live being, when it's that animal, that horse with a sore leg that we're connecting with, we're not just sort of some impartial observer who is discerning what is. There's a real heart-based and care-based connection with that being, and they know that you are open to them and in a kind of a silent dialogue with them. So over the years, I've come to understand this less as a sender and a receiver, and a process of information getting, and more of just a simple merging with and becoming one with the truth of that other being.
When Anna first mentioned this, I was deeply moved because non-speakers, their parents, and teachers have told me over and over that what's happening is actually not simple telepathy. It's a merging of consciousness, and it's daily. It's not a one-off thing just to capture in a test. It embodies their entire life.
And then our mind has to interrogate aspects of that truth, like their physical health, for example. So if I'm silently in my mind asking a horse, where on your body are you experiencing discomfort? I will know that on my body as a mapping of the horse's body. So as a horse with a sore front left leg, my left arm will become sore in the sort of corresponding place and to a lesser degree. So there's many ways that I perceive the information, but it's not because the horse has decided to send a mental image or a physical sensation or the words. which is why this is all totally beyond and before and outside of words or language.
Early in your journey, were you doubted what you were experiencing, or were you always certain?
I remember that early in my journey, I'd often doubt what was coming through, and the process for that matter. I was raised in a very ordinary suburban upbringing, nothing special, no wild camping trips or anything fantastic like that. And with my left brain logical side, I was always questioning what I was receiving. I'm so grateful that the protocol of the Institute was to do case studies that were double-blind case studies. We had to communicate with animals we didn't know, who lived with people we'd never met before, and had to ask a series of questions and write up and transcribe both sides of the conversation, so to speak. And then the animal's person and the Institute would vet all of that for accuracy or not and how we were doing. And I must say, the doubting mind has amazing ways to try to explain away information that didn't originate from my own mind. Just really does. I would make myself believe that if I was seeing, a green tennis ball, it might be because, my favorite color is green, or I'd forgotten to make that tennis appointment. Instead it just really is, the dog's favorite toy. But there was one moment that just really made me finally intend to drop that skepticism. I was communicating with a dog who I'd never met, who lived far away outside Sacramento. And one of the standard questions we asked all these cats and dogs was, is there anything missing from your life? Obviously trying to be helpful and give them whatever they might want. Usual answers were, more walks or different kind of food. So that's the other problem in this matter of skepticism, is we have some possible imagined answers already there, and we have to, on the sort of internal level within myself, I have to listen more deeply to the more subtle, soft voice that the intuition is bringing, instead of the loud data of possible answers that my mind already has. Anyway, I asked this dog, is there anything missing from your life? Immediately, I got a very brief mental flash of a bald eagle flying through the sky, and then the upper part of a man's arm. And I sort of shook my head, rubbed my eyes, and asked again. Nothing, just deafening silence. So embarrassed, I wrote it down. I didn't want to write it down and get a poor rating from my mentors for such rubbish, but I wrote it down and gave feedback to the lady, who burst into tears. Apparently, her young husband had died a year before in a car crash, and he had a tattoo of a bald eagle's head on his bicep. And that was the dog showing me that, of course, who he was missing was the other man in his life, by those unique identifiers. And after that, I thought, goodness me, okay, I'm gonna trust. And I don't always get it right. It's a matter of fine tuning and practice. And if I don't understand it, that doesn't matter. A lot of this work, quite frankly, is work on self and continue to get my ego out of the way, my desire to know, my attachment to the outcome, my hoped for answers, which is why it's often the most difficult to connect with our own animals, because we have such a vested interest emotionally in what their answers are. No matter what your home language is as a human, you can connect with any being, no matter how large or small, and have a fully conscious exchange. Sometimes I find it very refreshing when the animals ask me some questions also, or give retorts to things that I'm saying. And that's when I know it really isn't a live communication. There are two parties in it. Perhaps one could just say essence to essence. And in that moment, you are deeply related and you are knowing each other. This is not just doing a psychic reading or remote viewing.
The ability to see remotely. Every man takes the limits of his own field of vision for the limits of the world. Arthur Schopenhauer. Whereas telepathy implies coupling one's consciousness with that of another conscious being, clairvoyance is visualizing distant or hidden images as though one had a psychic telescope, periscope, or camera. Clairvoyance, sometimes called remote viewing, has reportedly found oil, mineral deposits, hidden treasure, and missing people. It has also been reported to diagnose medical and mechanical problems by seeing inside ill people and malfunctioning machines. Telepathic-like experiences, such as thinking something at the same time as someone else, are more common than psychically seeing what is behind an unopened door, inside an envelope, or halfway across the world. However, reports of clairvoyance are not rare. Surveys across several nations show that 1/3 to 1/2 of the general population thinks they've experienced telepathy, and 1/5 reports experiences akin to clairvoyance. There are at least 2 different types of clairvoyant experiences. For some, the images arise from their unconscious, just as telepathic thoughts do. The image can come spontaneously in a flash, or it can evolve over time while the person concentrates on retrieving it. In the other type, clairvoyant experiences occur in what are called out-of-body experiences, OBEs. During an OBE, people no longer feel that their consciousness is confined by their body. The visual perspective they experience would be impossible if it were. They may see something remote or from a different angle than their head would allow, such as seeing the room from the ceiling. Clairvoyance and medical diagnosis. One of the most famous clairvoyants of all time was the sleeping prophet, Edgar Cayce, who was born in 1877 and died in 1943. Cayce's family were prominent Kentucky tobacco farmers, and his grandfather was locally known as a psychic. Like many psychics whose abilities appeared after brain injury, Cayce had such an accident. When he was 3 years old, he fell off a fence post onto a board with a protruding nail that not only punctured his skull, but also entered his brain. Reportedly, he escaped any serious consequences. Starting in 1901, Edgar Cayce did more than 14,000 clairvoyant readings based solely upon the client's name and address. He told his secretary about his visions while still in a self-induced OBE. Of these readings, more than 9,400 concerned medical diagnoses and treatment recommendations. He originally wanted to live a normal life as a professional photographer, so his readings were just a hobby for the first 10 years. But his hobby helped so many people that it became his calling and continued the rest of his life. Although he never gained financially from his readings, others profited from his predictions about the stock market and suggestions about where to drill for oil. Cayce's fame became widespread in 1910 after meeting Dr. Wesley Ketchum, a reputable homeopath who decided to get a reading for himself. Dr. Ketchum had a condition he had self-diagnosed as appendicitis, which was confirmed by other doctors. He was scheduled for surgery, but Cayce gave him the diagnosis of a spinal condition that was impinging upon a nerve. After Cayce's diagnosis was confirmed by successful spinal manipulation, Dr. Ketchum consulted with Cayce on his most difficult cases and submitted a paper to the American Society of Clinical Research that declared Cayce a medical wonder. The New York Times spread the news. On October 9, 1910, its headline read, "Illiterate man becomes a doctor when hypnotized." Among Cayce's visitors were Woodrow Wilson, Henry Wallace, Nikola Tesla, Thomas Edison, and many industrialists, bankers, and doctors. The psychologist Gina Sermonara spent a year studying records of his readings and wrote her conclusions in Many Mansions. She found that many readings were extremely accurate, and the clients improved after following Cayce's recommendations. Another of the scores of books about him is Edgar Cayce in Context, The Readings, Truth and Fiction, by Kenneth Paul Johnson. Considered to be both objective and open-minded, Johnson concluded that Cayce had a genuine gift. Cayce was also labeled an authentic mystic by Baba Fakir Chand, an Indian guru known for his outspoken criticism of many gurus, prophets, and mystics, whom he regarded as duping millions of people. Cayce's sons, Edgar Evans Cayce and Hugh Lynn Cayce, compiled their own study of their father's work. They found only 200 flawed readings out of 14,246. Edgar Cayce is considered the father of holistic medicine because his recommendations form the basis for much of the holistic medicine still practiced. Most traditional Western doctors consider his treatments, such as colonic therapy, enemas, for detoxifying the body, to be quackery. But millions of people follow and swear by practices introduced by Casey, and some have gained scientific validity. For example, he advocated eating almonds, which have been proven to have many health benefits. He also saw the importance of spiritual and psychological issues in people's health. Like Casey, medical intuitives psychically diagnose illness in patients without information from tests or interviews. Medical intuitives often claim to have no other psychic abilities, whereas Casey later branched out into more esoteric and controversial areas, such as readings about past lives and ancient cultures. And Casey made medical diagnoses while in a deep trance. But most medical intuitives do not operate this way. The physician Norman Shealy researched medical intuition in the 1980s with the medical intuitive Carolyn Meese. Their study involved 50 patients who individually sat in Shealy's consultation room while Meese made diagnoses based upon their names and birth dates from her office 1,200 miles away. She felt that the physical distance was an advantage because personal connections with patients sometimes blocked her ability. The results are described in their book, The Creation and Health. Shealy reported that Meese had an overall accuracy of 93%. Examples of diagnoses Meese and Shealy made in common were schizophrenia, migraine headaches, myofascial pain, depression, sexual problems, venereal herpes, back pain, anxiety, wasting of the brain or Alzheimer's, and epilepsy. Research on remote viewing. Remote viewing differs from remote medical diagnosis because the target is an object or a scene. In remote medical diagnosis, the psychic may be tapping into someone's conscious or unconscious knowledge of what is wrong. In order to establish remote viewing as distinct from telepathy, no one else should know the target. But many remote viewing experiments were intentionally set up with someone concentrating on the target in order to give the remote viewer the maximum opportunity for correct identification. A famous study on OBEs and clairvoyance was done by Charles Tart when he was a psychologist at the University of California, Davis. His subject was a woman named Miss Z, who said she had several OBEs per week. Tart took her into the laboratory to investigate the phenomenon. She was able to read a 5-digit number that was kept out of her reach or sight. She couldn't have physically gotten up to see the numbers because she was hooked up to an EEG to measure her brain waves. Any major physical movement would have disturbed the recordings. She said that her consciousness left her body to reach the height necessary to read the number from above. Because Tart knew the number, Miss Z might have learned it through telepathy, but her description is consistent with the OBE type of remote viewing.
This week, we look at the rest of the living world. What if plants aren't silent at all, but communicating in ways we've only just begun to remember? We'll hear from mycologist Paul Stamets, herbal experts, indigenous elders from the Lakota Nation, the Tsimshian Nation, and the Kuntanawa Nation. And possibly most consequentially, we'll meet a non-speaker named Nina, who says she effortlessly communicates with plants via telepathy.
I'm Natalia. My youngest sister is Nina, and she's a non-speaker who communicates through spelling and is telepathic.
This is Natalia Meehan. We got connected immediately after the first season of the telepathy tapes came out last year.
My family knew about the telepathy because everyone was experiencing it inside of our home with Nina, but I did not feel like it was something I could talk about. I binged the telepathy tapes in 2 days, and now I feel like I'm able to finally talk about all of these things with no judgment and total openness and realize that we have not been alone.
Nina is 19 years old and lives with her family in Connecticut. When I hopped on Zoom with Natalia, I met her sister Nina for the first time, and I asked her what she, as a non-speaker, thought about the telepathy tapes, and she spelled that it wasn't that impressive to her because it was old news. And here's a clip from our original Zoom call.
she ended up saying, I'm so not impressed. This is so normal for me, but I'm glad that this is getting out into the world.
I love that. I just think the best response from a non-speaker ever is that it's old news. I mean, I love that. Of course, telepathy feels like old news to those who've been utilizing it. And as we'll explore in this episode, a lot of the abilities and connections our society has dismissed as being impossible or magical would be considered old news or even no news at all to our ancestors and many of the indigenous populations who've kept their traditions intact for millennia. And perhaps there's no older or more profound tradition than our relationship with plants and the ways that we've communed with them.
Nina, for the majority of her life, had really no effective way to communicate.
The challenge wasn't Nina's intelligence, it was motor planning. Nina has apraxia, a mind-body disconnect that makes motor planning difficult. And as we explored in season 1, speaking relies on fine motor coordination, and that's nearly impossible for those with apraxia. But pointing to letters on a letterboard or a keyboard uses gross motor movement. And with time, guidance, and practice with a professional coach, many non-speakers can learn to spell their thoughts. It can take years for the motor pathways to form, but when they do, a non-speaker can be unlocked and they can finally communicate. When Nina was 17, it all clicked for her, and she began communicating via spelling on a letterboard.
When she started to spell, all of our lives changed completely. It was really like getting to know her for the first time. Simple things like knowing her favorite color or what she wanted for dinner that night was huge for us. But then the deeper layers of how intelligent she is and the things she would bring up on her own about her interests were extremely surprising and shocking because she had no formal education when it came to any of these things, whether it was with different languages, with math, or with science and biology and plants.
Nina has 2 older sisters, Paloma and Natalia has become one of Nina's chief communication partners.
And so when she was openly spelling, one of the first things she said was, I'm telepathic. And I remember my family and I were like, what does that even mean? She definitely made it a point to make it known that she was telepathic. I mean, she brought it up all the time, stating it, but then also showed us in different ways where she would know where people were throughout the day, conversations they had, things that happened in the past, things that even happened and turned out to transpire into the future. It kind of scared us initially. I think we were all really surprised and taken aback, and it wasn't like any of us even knew about telepathy before.
And one of the things that Nina would communicate to her family most about was her relationship with plants.
Nina would share things about plants spontaneously and really bring it up on her own and share about their medicinal properties on a physical level, but also in a spiritual sense. And she knew things about plants that nobody knew. It surprised me right away because she would write about a plant. She would talk about its medicinal properties, how it's traditionally used, why, where it's from. And I wouldn't know anything about it. I would have to look it up online or something or in a book. And once I was able to verify that, I was like, oh my gosh, something is going on here.
Natalia and the family made sure I understood that they didn't know about the plant information that Nina was discussing, because as we explored in season 1, some non-speakers claim that they can hear thoughts or read minds. So if Nina's family didn't know any of this plant or herb knowledge, and Nina, because of apraxia, couldn't control her body well enough to type or search for information on her own, then where was all of this information coming from? How did she have such accurate information about plants and herbal remedies?
Everything she's saying is totally accurate. And it became super interesting to me because it was obviously something that was real and happening. When I asked her, Nina, how did you know that? How did you know these things? She would tell me, the plant told me. I speak with the plants. I commune with the plants. She talked about being able to receive information from plants, regardless of distance, regardless of time and space. I mean, most of the plants that she talks about are plants that she's never even physically met.
One of the things that completely changed the family's worldview was this. Nina wasn't just talking about plants. She was offering loved ones and acquaintances extremely specific herbal remedies that turned out to be right. They weren't just vague insights, but precise plant and herbal medicines and uses that nobody had taught her.
She would want to tell people what to take, like different plants, and she would say that she can connect with the energy of plants and of the earth.
And here's Nina's mom, Raquel, who has witnessed this time and again.
It was just like, what do you actually know? And how do you know it? She's like, the plants commune with me. I can read the plants. That's how. And I don't know what that means, but I just know that she would go right into so-and-so needs passion flower because they have and then we would look it up, and then sure enough, there it was. It was like that.
She could see what was going on with a person and know their issues with their health before they ever said anything. And it was always a surprise and a shock for me.
And so after Nina identifies maybe an ailment or medical condition for someone, does she always offer like a medicinal suggestion?
She does always offer some suggestions, and they're always so fascinating to me because they're very specific.
And the story gets even more personal than this for Natalia.
Part of the story with me coming back home and working with Nina was because I became really sick, and I was living in New Orleans, and I had to come home, and no one really knew what was going on with my health. I mean, I was in and out of the hospital constantly, and there was a lot of scary unanswered questions about what was going on.
But even though the doctors couldn't figure out what was occurring in her body, Nina seemed to. Nina began suggesting specific herbal remedies as a way to address the things that not even Natalia's doctors had identified yet.
She recommended me this plant initially called astragalus, which I was not familiar with. And she told me that I needed to take it every day, multiple times a day, and that it was going to help me slowly build back up my immune system and become more resilient. And she was like, this is going to be really nourishing to you and helpful to you. So I didn't know if that was how it works or if it was going to be helpful. And I ended up looking into it, and astragalus is a herb in traditional Chinese medicine that's used exactly for that purpose. And I ended up taking it and using it, and it had profound benefits for me and my health. And she knew things that I didn't know that turned out to be true later on, once I was able to actually figure out what the diagnosis was.
And Natalia isn't the only family member who's been touched by Nina's spontaneous suggestion. So to understand what Nina's doing, that helped me to understand her process as two distinct steps. So first she starts by reading the etheric field, or that energetic layer closest to the body, and then identifies areas that feel blocked or disrupted. And then she tunes into plants for guidance, and not poetic generalities about herbs, but specific and targeted insight. And to Nina, this communication sounds like it's as natural as listening. Here she is again.
Their communication feels like gentle sounds, images, and emotions wrapped into a hazy plume of smoke. And in through the smoke, I know exactly where the fire came from, who created it, what kind of fuel and starter it's made out of, and the stories or teachings shared around it. Telepathy is not complicated, in fact. It's our most natural form of information exchange. The exchange is effortless, like breathing. You can focus on it intentionally, but just as you automatically and naturally exchange oxygen for carbon dioxide, you are always breathing. Telepathy is more subtle and powerfully precise than the messy language of words.
Wow. And for Nina, this connection with plants didn't suddenly appear or evolve as she got older. She says she's always been connected to them.
I've been communing with plant spirits since I was in my mom's womb. I could always feel their frequency and nourishment. Humans wouldn't exist without plant support. We rely on the oxygen they give us. They are original medicine, original food. They work on the energetic and physical bodies that span from microbial measures to the macrobiomes of our planet. They regulate Earth's body. All beings are telepathic, especially plants. Plants tell me information and are my family. Plants are perceptive healers. They are my guides, teachers, allies, and friends. To commune, we spend time in sacred space where we speak the same language.
What strikes me most is this isn't just information exchange. It feels like a relationship. And like any good relationship, it begins with truly seeing, with recognizing another being for who they are and what they carry. And here's Nina again.
I can't fully capture and tell you with words how loving and nurturing plants are. They give and give. They want to help us, to heal us, to guide and nourish us. They see us for who we really are and accept us, exactly where we're at.
Nina's experience is undeniable to the people around her. She knows things that she should not be able to know. She offers remedies that no one taught her, and they work.
In the indigenous communities before Christianity, and there was suddenly just one God, everything had consciousness. The animistic worldview is so strong with most people who live close to nature, not connected to any tribes or anything. It means that humans that live very close to nature, they will hear nature speak, they will feel nature speak, they will see nature speak. And nature does speak. And I used to say that there's a technology on every part of the land over the world that is built between the people and the land and the plants and animals and the spirits. And that is 1,000 and thousands of years of connection. And it's still there. So wherever you land, wherever you put up the eco-village, there's a technology there, a spiritual technology that you can go into. You can revive that. You don't have to make everything up again. Find the wisdom keepers of the land where you settled. Bring in the elders. Let them tell you the stories. Who were living there? Where do you find the food? What has been there for a long, long time? How are the songs? Make the people that live on that land that you choose for your village to tell you. And then you sit down with the spirits. You map the land. You ask the land, where should we put up our village? And then you ask the land and the spirits, how can we serve you? We are coming here with good intentions. How can we be servants of this land? How can we invite in the animals that live here, the plants that live here? How can we cooperate with the plants so that the earth can be even more fertile? And I think to choose a landscape that will sort of fit the community. And if you are maybe harvesting something that doesn't fit on that land, you should choose another part of the land. Because in the north, we don't try to force Mother Nature to produce things that's not natural there. So I think it's this to realize that we are beings of the land. And wherever I will put my roots down, I need to put them in the earth where I am. So I need to, if I'm going to move, I also want to find a village. And then I need to relearn everything because my skills in the north will not help me in the south. So I think it's that, and especially the spiritual connection, because nothing is lost. There are beings on the land you choose that is so, so old. Physical beings, the trees, you have mushrooms that can be 3,000 years old. You have people probably there that know the songs. So, and the spirits are eternal. So it's to sit down on the land, connect the spirits, tell who you are. In the Sami way, it's a personal connection with the spirits. We don't have big ceremonies. We're very few. And it's my, it's my offer is to be there on the land, to sing for the land. I need to do my course with the land almost every day. It's not the shaman or the Nuaidis in the Sami ways. They are the ones who dive to the other dimensions. But every single human are responsible for their connection with the land. So to also prepare for the spiritual ways when you start your eco-village and let the land speak. I'm working on something called it's a council for nature. And I think that's an idea to give away too, to put up a council in your eco-village and then leave some chairs for the trees, for the plants, for the spirits, and put people there that can embody and talk for the spirits. What do the trees think when we're going to put up a field over there? Is it okay for them? Maybe it is. What do the spirits have to say in this matter? So invite in all these forces that is already there.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, I think I was sharing that shortly yesterday in the process of creating a community. And we were in this time of finding a land when I had the first conversation with you, and you were sharing this thing. I was like, this is so beautiful, but how do I actually do it?
Yeah.
Okay, so I go there and I sit on the land, and then what should I do? How will the voices come? What should I listen to? But I think you explained it very well right now. Like this thing of also creating a council and being
Yeah,
able to.
creating the space. And in the northern tribes, our altars and everything is nature. So our altars are the big stones that seems like trolls that drew them there. Some of them have a spirit living in them. So we have these altars that we know where they are. But also when we travel, we can make space for spirit. So we use normally the reindeer antlers. They are amazing. So we put up a little monument, and then I start to invite in. I give food and drinks, and I sing. And then spirit will come, and I can exchange with spirit. So when I stay there for maybe a week, and when I move, I let the spirit go. I bring the antlers, or I make something else on the next spot. So it's so easy. You don't need anything particular because nature has everything, and you find your way wherever you are.
Thank you. Wow. Do you want to share a bit about this nature village concept? Because I think that's so interesting. We're talking about eco villages, and Lone is bringing this concept of nature villages.
Yes, because my people are not farmers. So whenever I come across, in the south also, there are a few eco villages in Norway, and it's all about farming, and I'm totally lost. I cannot grow anything. I'm good with animals, I'm good with humans and children, but these things are not for me, but I'm really good at finding food in nature. And we might want to settle in a forest. We might want to settle on a mountain or on hills where there are not much earth. So there are possible ways to live. Humans have done that for a long time without just farming. And I also say that there's a little misconception in Europe because I was just in Denmark for 14 days. And when I flew over, my heart was crying a lot because there was no nature left. There was just farms and monocultures, and every tree was on a line. And when I landed, I was a guest in the grandmother's circle, the earth there. And they talked about nature, how much they love to be in nature, walk in nature. And I realized they talked about their gardens. And so I was like, okay, I think we need to make a little conceptual clearing here. So you have nature landscapes, you have nature landscape, and you have farmers and farming landscapes. So nature landscapes is in the north where I come from. When you come there, you will see very little traces of people. You will see pure land, but I will see the pathways that we have walked. I will see where we put up our tents. I will see where our earth houses were. I will see where our people have been praying. I will see where the reindeer paths are. I will see where our fishing boats went out. So I will see all of that, but we didn't make the big imprint. So I think these nature villages is about living in nature, not making those big imprints. Humans somehow needs to fix everything. I had a friend of mine who totally misunderstood the concept. He said that, I think humans are put on earth to put everything in order. And I was like, because nature did that. We humans, we are sort of making a mess because we need to sort everything, name everything, put everything online. And I think that the people who put their heart and their trust in nature and use nature as a compass, there's a lot of us too. And to live in these nature villages, I think that is a concept that I could thrive in at least, and maybe more people would love that.
Yeah, I wonder how we can integrate that more into our eco villages that are all over Europe. Like this idea of also land protection and how to actually. Do you want to talk a bit about that? How do you think we can bring that to our eco villages?
The eco village, I think, is on the old days there were houses and fields. But what if you put up other houses a bit further away from each other, a bit further into nature, where those people can live. The people that needs to have nature around them, so that they can be protectors in the forest or on the hills that still are connected to the village. That's one way. I started up a new religious society in Norway. We are just waiting for the acknowledgement from the government. That's called nature people, because it's in Norwegian it's called naturfolk, and indigenous people is called urfolk. So it's just bringing more people into the indigenous frame and protection. And that is to hack the matrix of the government, because the government, you cannot, but if you are environmentalist protector, you cannot get any conversation, or you cannot enter the government. They are like closing the doors. You can stand outside and bang on the doors and yell, but they will not listen. But they have one concept called religious protection. And for me, that's a back door. So if we get that acknowledgement, the governments have vowed to protect people's religious rights to do their religious ceremonies. And as indigenous people of the land, our mountains are the most sacred thing we have. We have sacred lakes that is, well, the story of the mountain is that our heaven is not in heaven. Our heaven is inside the sacred mountain. Almost the same as the Buddhists have, I realized suddenly. And our sacred mountains, when you die, you go in there. Everything is warm, good. Your friends are there. Animals are there. And there are some entrances you can enter the mountain alive to. And some of them are these sacred lakes that are this upcome of water. If you're very brave, you can dive down there. There will be a double bottom, and you can go and enter the mountain from there. And also the river that flows from there is sacred for real. And in the governments today, there's a protection of ancient religious sites. There's a little protection. So if there's a road being made, they will think about it and then do it anyhow. But if it's used today in religious ceremony, in a religious society that is acknowledged by the government, there's a lot stronger protection. So this is the way in Norway, at least, we're going to protect the sacred mountain, the river that feeds all the people there, the sacred lake. So this is one of the ways to hack the matrix, because I think we're not people who fight. We're not warriors like that. We need to fight in our ways. We need to find the ways in to talk, because I always say that the system is faceless and rootless, and it rolls. It has its rules, but inside the system, there's a lot of good human beings.
Yes.
So it's to get the entrance there, so we can use our warm, loving ways to protect what is dear to us. So this way of having ceremonies on the land will also protect the land for the government. Every single human are responsible for their connection with the land. So to also prepare for the spiritual ways when you start your eco village, and let the land speak. I'm working on something called and it's a council for nature. And I think that's an idea to give away too, to put up a council in your eco village, and then leave some chairs for the trees, for the plants, for the spirits, and put people there that can embody and talk for the spirits. What do the trees think when we're going to put up a field over there? Is it okay for them? Maybe it is. What do the spirits have to say in this matter? So invite in all these forces that is already there.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah. I think I was sharing that shortly yesterday, in the process of creating a community. And we were in this time of finding a land when I had the first conversation with you, and you were sharing this thing. I was like, this is so beautiful, but how do I actually do it?
Yeah.
Okay, so I go there and I sit on the land, And then what should I? How will the voices come? What should I listen to? But I think you explained it very well right now. Like this thing of also creating a council and being able
creating the space and in the northern tribes, our altars and everything is nature. So our altars are the big stones that seems like trolls that drew them there. Some of them have a spirit living in them. So we have these altars that we know where they are. But also when we travel, we can make space for spirit. So we use normally the reindeer antlers. They are amazing. So we put up a little monument, and then I start to invite in. I give food and drinks and I sing. And then spirit will come and I can exchange with spirit. So when I stay there for maybe a week, and when I move, I let the spirit go. I bring the antlers, or I make something else on the next spot. So it's so easy. You don't need anything particular because nature has everything, and you find your way wherever you are.
Thank you. Wow. Do you want to share a bit about this nature village concept? Because I think that's so interesting. We're talking about eco villages, and Lone is bringing this concept of nature villages.
Yes, because my people are not farmers. So whenever I come across, in the south also, there are a few eco villages in Norway. And it's all about farming, and I'm totally lost. I cannot grow anything. I'm good with animals, I'm good with humans and children. But these things are not for me, but I'm really good at finding food in nature. And I think that we can see that Europe, especially, is getting warmer and warmer, and there's less and less fertile earth. And we might want to settle in a forest. We might want to settle on a mountain or on hills where there are not much earth. So there are possible ways to live. Humans have done that for a long time without just farming. I also say that there's a little misconception in Europe, because I was just in Denmark for 14 days. And when I flew over, my heart was crying a lot because there was no nature left. There was just farms and monocultures, and every tree was on a line.
Yeah.
And when I landed, I was a guest in the grandmother's circle, the earth there. And they talked about nature, how much they love to be in nature, walk in nature. And I realized they talked about their gardens. And so I was like, okay, I think we need to make a little conceptual clearing here. So you have nature landscapes. You have nature landscape, and you have farmers and farming landscapes. So nature landscapes is in the north where I come from. When you come there, you will see very little traces of people. You will see pure land, but I will see the pathways that we have walked. I will see where we put up our tents. I will see where our earth houses were. I will see where our people have been praying. I will see where the reindeer paths are. I will see where our fishing boats went out. So I will see all of that, but we didn't make the big imprint. So I think these nature villages is about living in nature, not making those big imprints.
Yes.
Humans somehow needs to fix everything. I had a friend of mine who totally misunderstood the concept. He said that, I think humans are put on earth to put everything in order. And I was like,
oh my gosh.
Because nature did that. We humans, we are sort of making a mess because we need to sort everything, name everything, put everything online. And I think that the people who put their heart and their trust in nature and use nature as a compass.
Again, forget about the thinking. Don't be smart about anything that's unnecessary and not intellectual. Feel. Open up the other. And also, I can recommend Ian McGilchrist, The Master and His Emissary, if you want to understand our brain, the halves and stuff like that, in order to understand thinking and feeling more.
Thank you.
Lorna?
Yes. First of all, it's I think it's a lot about how you approach the plant. And for me, I always sing. I go singing, this Sami way of singing that's called yoik. I call the plant. I call the medicine. And when I walk through the forest, and then the ones who are ready sort of shines. They sort of come up. And as Åsa also say, it's when you sit down with them and you connect with them, and you will get this heavy feeling in your body, or you can feel that the field of the plant is pulling closer to itself. It's not connecting to you. It's a very clear no. It's also ethics, depending on what plant, how much you take. I think also that also says people today are taking way too much of everything. Microdosing, like homeopathic doses, connecting with the plants in the spirit world, invite them into your dreams, your life. And most of these medicines, it's the less is more that is for true. With my plant that I'm talking of today, Amanita muscaria, you only get ill when you take too much. And so it's like you connect to other humans. It's to build that relationship with trust and this thing to always give something before you take. In this world today, we are taught about giving tobacco and these things, but on my land, tobacco is quite new, so we don't use that. We use, depending on what plant it is, it's either to use the songs, I love that, but you can also help the plant to spread, like Åsa says. We also, with the mushroom, if you have a grown mushroom that has the spores ready, you will spread it like that. You push it and the spores will fly.
Okay.
And also raising the awareness about the plants among the humans, especially Amanita, who is so demonized everywhere. Our kids are taught to step on it, and they say it's so poisonous that you should destroy everyone you see. Is to shift that consciousness and to help the plants, because they just want to help us. Of course, it's the Amanita can change your perspective on size, on in the physical world, and in the old times it was used as a traveling agent. So if you eat a lot of Amanita, it will turn off your sense of time. So if you eat Amanita when you have a long walk for 3 days to the next village, if I want to walk to Åsa and meet her in Giron, it will take me 3 days, maybe more. And then if I eat Amanita on the way, I will just maybe remember 3 hours, because it shuts the brain off in the after time. So you are there when you walk, conscious, clear, but you don't remember that you have been walking further. So it's a very interesting plant. Okay, Åsa?
I'm looking forward to welcome you here. Come.
I will. Do you see animals eating kvan?
Yeah, actually, I'm also a horse person. So yes, absolutely. But it's also, one also need to be really aware. Horses are no machines, they are less machine. They are as little machines as we are. We need to have the education and the culture. My horse was super unique. She was brought up among older horses, and lösdrift in Sweden. Well, anyways, it's in a huge pasture. So her mother was also the same, because they usually only value stallions and geldings, not the mares. So she could learn which plant when. And I followed her, and she taught me a lot. And I understood it's culture. It's not only nature, it's also culture. And that is the same for us. We need to relearn, educate, but then also we need to be in the nature to roll out our knowledge, but add feeling. That's the thing. That's what we share and talk about, basically. Use that intelligence and instinct, then you cannot go wrong that much.
Nina's understanding of plants seems to reach beyond biology into ancestral memory, which of course makes you wonder what our ancestors may have known that we have since forgotten. Across cultures, indigenous people have understood that plants aren't just resources, they're living relatives and teachers, and communion with the natural world and that those who came before us wasn't unusual or strange, it was just woven into life itself. To explore this deeper, we turn to the Kuntanawa people, who say they've used telepathy to connect with plants and ancestors for as long as they can remember.
Na verdade, nós temos nossa forma de se conectar.
This is Haru Kuntanawa of the Kuntanawa Nation in the Amazon forest in Brazil.
So primarily the people of the forest have their own way of connecting with the forest, their technology, which is this connection that they have with nature and with the forest.
And this is Ruda, who will be translating for Haru. Haru is describing what the Kuntanawa Nation call their technology, which is how they refer to their telepathic ability to communicate with plants, nature, animals, and each other.
And this biological connection that we have with nature, with the people, with the forest, allows us to also connect with the spiritual realms. It is telepathic connection because when you're connecting with these plants, it allows you to step into a realm where you can be in the present, but you can also be with the ancestors in the past, and as well as stepping into the future. There's the energy with everything that could manifest in what we eat, what we consume, and those energies then transform into frequencies. And through the frequencies, we understand like the more subtle but the deeper connections with the vibrations of the frequencies that come from the energies that we get from nature. And this is something that has been passed on from generation to generation from the ancestors, and it's something that you develop. And when you start to understand that, it starts to become more of a flow.
What Haru describes is not an isolated worldview. From the Amazon to the northern plains, indigenous people have always understood that the natural world is alive and conscious and in conversation with us. The Lakota hold their own teaching about this, and their language itself is shaped by wind, water, animals, and the spirits moving throughout the land.
I believe that some of the oldest words and some of the oldest language does come out of the environment and nature itself. Using the sounds that the nature makes, we developed our language.
This is Ione Quigley. She's an elder of the Lakota tribe, a Native American tribe indigenous to the Great Plains.
But I believe that nature itself has a language that we Lakota know it's there. We know it's there.
The Lakota have a deep relationship with nature. They believe all things, plants, animals, elements, and the land itself are connected and share a sacred bond.
We believe that everything has a spirit. There's no such a thing as an inanimate object to us. Everything is alive.
And this is Rick Two Dogs, also a Lakota leader.
There's some medicines that are passed down through what we call the Teospai, the extended family. A lot of the traditional healers get their own through fasting, through dreams.
Teospaye, like Rick said, is the Lakota concept of family that extends beyond blood relations to every member within the tribal clan and community, even those who've passed on. And just like Nina gets information and gifts from her ancestors, this is how knowledge and spirituality is passed down in the Lakota tribe. And the close relationship with their environment also allows them to communicate with and gain wisdom from the plants, animals, and elements of their surroundings. Ione herself had a personal experience of this. She and her brother went with an elder from their tribe to harvest a plant from the forest, but when they found the plant they needed, it was surrounded by poison ivy. Ione and her brother thought their journey was for nothing until the medicine man said something incredible.
He told my brother, he said, never mind all the poison ivy. They're just here to protect that plant. So they won't hurt you. They won't do anything to you because you're here for that plant. And so he went up with him. They did the prayers. We make an offering to the plant before we harvest it. And then they dug the plant up. And when we got home, my brother, well, there was no poison ivy on him, although he was in the middle of it. But that grandpa had asked the poison ivy to let him make his way to the plant. So he did.
Rick Two Dogs shares a story from Black Elk, a revered medicine man of the Lakota, born in 1863.
If you read and do research into Black Elk, in his vision, they show him this plant that he's supposed to find. So this man goes with him who is a thunder dreamer, what we call a heoka. So they sat on this hill and they sang Hioka songs. And this red-tailed hawk was circling down in the valley there. And so he told his friend, he said, that is where the medicine is growing, he said. So they went down, and sure enough, they found the medicine. So he made a prayer before he dug the medicine and offered the tobacco. A lot of these plants even have their own songs. So you sing that song before you harvest the plant. And in his prayer, he said, now we're going to go among the weak and the sick, and there will be happy days among them.
As mentioned earlier, making an offering such as singing a song or leaving a gift like tobacco is paramount to the communication between the Lakota and the natural world, especially when they're asking or looking for information about plant medicinal use. Here's Nina explaining her own process when she's communing with plants.
Honorable harvest methods are important, like introducing yourself, asking for permission, and giving an offering. Plant stewardship is a sacred art form. Each plant has their own energy and character. Plants are sentient beings. They want to help us, to heal us, to guide and nourish us. They see us for who we really are and accept us, exactly where we're at.
The Lakota call it intuition, Nina calls it telepathy. Whatever the name, the experience seems the same. Communication does not just happen through speech, it happens through sensing and knowing and feeling. And here's herbalist David Winston again.
There is what we'll call the language of plants, and it seems like most indigenous people, most cultures have a language of plants. Sometimes it has been forgotten, and sometimes it has been subsumed.
After researching this episode, it was clear that the language of plants was once spoken everywhere, in prayer, in ceremonies, in medicine. But the rise of materialism and colonization and modern technology taught us to value what we could measure and doubt what we could feel.
Most people who grew up in this culture were not trained from a young age to understand intuition and things like that.
And our greatest error may be believing that there's only one right way to know.
Science is a way of learning. Intuition is a way of learning. Dreams are a way of learning. Communicating with plants or other parts of nature is a way of learning. Observing patients is a way of learning. Reading books is a way of learning. And none of them are better than the other. And I think they especially work really well when you combine them and you don't shut yourself off to any avenue of learning.
In modern day Western medicine, I've never read where the Nagi, the spirit, is really addressed.
Here's Rick Two Dogs and Naomi Quigley of the Lakota again.
They compartmentalize everything. They don't see the whole holistic spectrum of things, and that we're just kind of a minute particle of it all.
And so that they're missing a big part, because our belief is that the spirit is the core or the root of our being.
And Nina sees the holistic spectrum as essential to understanding our place in this world.
Humans wouldn't exist without plant support. They regulate Earth's body. They regulate your body and mine. They are not to be seen as dead matter. They are animate, alive, and ever-loving.
I will go into my family history, how I'm thought to relate and respond and communicate. That's my angle, the traditional one. And what I want you to see and pay attention to closely is what kind of plants grow outside people's homes or outside villages, cities, these places, your own house. Because nature is totally generous and she wants to help us. And she's sending her ambassadors. And this is not anyone. This is an Archangelica. This is a really strong one. And if you see, I don't know, but the stem is massive. It doesn't bend when it's windy. It stays erect. The stem is hollow like celery, but it's way bigger. It's almost like a tree. And Lorna, you said that in your parts, there's not that many pompous trees around, but this one is almost like one. She's you can see her from afar. She grows in moist places. She loves to grow by the creek, and she's also lowering. I heard Kira says that chaga is lowering the blood pressure, and this is what she does too. And she's also she's also good for everything bad, basically, like an angel. And I will go deeper into that, but she loves water, and water is emotions. And I want you also to park this logical thinking side of the brain, because we are so primed and so kind of forced into that part, which you cannot separate from feeling. It's impossible. Otherwise, we would never have anxiety, panic attacks, stuff like that. Thought and feeling are inseparable. They move together. But we only look at the thinking part and suppress the feelings. Now we're parking the thinking part and we only go by the feeling part. This is how we communicate.
I'm a scientist who studies fungi, and I've been a mycologist for, ever since I was 14.
Paul is an expert on the mycorrhizal network, the vast underground web where fungi and mushrooms connect trees and plants. Think of it as the forest's internet, often called the Wood Wide Web, a living, operating communication and resource sharing system. And through it, trees send nutrients, exchange information, warn of danger, take care of their kin, and support each other.
Let's first accept a basic premise. Does mushroom mycelium, for instance, or nature have consciousness? And does it have language? Now, we have to accept the fact that we're articulating these concepts within the brain that's evolved, that we receive from nature. And so the constructs of our language and our capability of cognition is admittedly a limitation. So by framing the question in that sense, we have an extremely narrow field of view and understanding.
If language shapes what we recognize as conscious and real, then this next discovery widens reality. Scientists are literally recording language patterns coming from mycelium networks, the networks of fungi and mushrooms under the forest floor.
Just in the past year, they decoded 50 words and word packets that mushroom mycelium is using. So we're starting to decode the language from another kingdom. And they're actually using word packets through electrodes that were placed across the mycelial network so they could see repeated word packets. And the words were a little bit more sophisticated than the words I'm using right now. That was on basically the first attempt this was discovered. It was published in a renowned journal. There's probably thousands of words. And moreover, when they start talking, what are the responses from the other organisms? What words are they using? So we have to keep this in context. The level of complexity here is so exciting because we're entering into a realm of interspecies communication. And just because they don't have vocal cords, just because they don't have a body like us, doesn't mean that language communication systems have not been developed.
So what if Nina's tapping into something we simply don't yet know how to measure? The same way tree communication sat in the shadows for decades before science finally recognized it.
Suzanne Simard's work actually kind of pierced the envelope and brought us to a new level of understanding that deciduous and conifer trees can actually exchange nutrients.
Dr. Suzanne Simard is a forest ecologist whose research changed how the world understands tree communication. Her groundbreaking book, Finding the Mother Tree, is incredible. And here's Dr. Simard in 2016 talking about one of her experiments.
So we set about an experiment. We grew mother trees with kin and stranger seedlings. And it turns out they do recognize their kin. Mother trees colonize their kin with bigger mycorrhizal networks. They send them more carbon below ground. They even reduce their own root competition to make elbow room for their kids. When mother trees are injured or dying, they also send messages, wisdom onto the next generation of seedlings. So we've used isotope tracing to trace carbon moving from an injured mother tree down her trunk into the mycorrhizal network and into her neighboring seedlings. Not only carbon, but also defense signals. And these two compounds have increased the resistance of those seedlings to future stresses. So trees talk.
Trees talk, a groundbreaking discovery that has now become foundational science.
It's like a symphony of connections and messaging and delivery of nutrients all at the same time.
This is Teresa Ryan from the University of British Columbia's Faculty of Forestry, whose work bridges Indigenous knowledge and forest science in the Mother Tree Project. She's a member of the Tsimshian Nation, Native peoples who are indigenous to the Pacific Northwest and British Columbia.
My Tsimshian name is Simhayetsk. I did my second postdoc with Suzanne Simard. She had read my dissertation, and she was amazed by our indigenous views of connections to place, how our indigenous social institutions were connected to our landscapes.
The Tsimshian social systems mirror the living networks of the forest.
There is competition in the plants in the forest. From an ecologist perspective, we understand that competition, but there's cooperation as well. Cedar and maple have a unique relationship.
They take turns sending carbon to the other when they need it most.
Douglas fir and birch. The birch actually have antibiotic properties with Douglas fir. Birch also provides shade for Douglas fir when they're seedling. So it is a relationship that's on a continuum throughout their life cycle histories. And if something happens to a mother tree that is a threat, then the mother tree, it's been shown that the carbon gets offloaded to its younger generation fairly rapidly. So it's amazing to see this reciprocal exchange with these species that are connected in the forest.
A few decades ago, the notion that trees communicate was dismissed as fantasy. Today is peer-reviewed science. And if forests exchange information through underground networks between species, sending warnings and nutrients, is it so far-fetched to think that humans might connect with the plant world too?
We live in this consumeristic culture of eating and actually shitting everything. So we don't need to overconsume. You don't actually need to pick this one. Start by relate. Sit next to her and just lower the barriers of thinking and park them and open up the feeling space, the feeling instinct. We all have it. So it's nothing you need to develop. It's here already within us. As long as we have a body, we have feeling. So, and just sit here and channel or open the possibility that she might start to send you some information, maybe not in words, but in feelings and maybe ideas and inspiration, inspire inspirations. So that is how you start to connect and reconnect with nature. And it's nothing super complicated, I would say. You don't need a teacher necessarily or one of these shamans to show you everything. Use your feeling instinct and then you cannot go wrong in
right.
that.
Wisdom is always going to be relatively rare and involves a lot of things. It involves the putting together of a life well lived and the experience that comes from that with an understanding of history, a sense of the spiritual, and an ability to aggregate information. But at the moment, I'd say that information is triumphing over a true understanding. And an understanding is what intelligence requires and means. So that much of the time we're amassing information and we kind of know in a technical way certain things. We probably know more in that sense than humanity has ever known. But we're also, in my view, less wise than humanity has ever been. This fact that we can know things and can do things has gone to our heads and made us hubristic, vain, and ridiculous because we think we can solve everything, but we don't understand a half of what we've got hold of here. So I think AI is a problem. Yeah.
So how does that map from an individual to a culture? Because as individuals, we have left hemispheres and right hemispheres, and we have a corpus callosum that divides them and is getting larger over time, implying that there's some narrative control going on. But our culture doesn't have a left or a right hemisphere. So is it just the proportion of the population that is kind of tilted in one direction, that periodically you said there were a couple historical cultures that flourished because they had more of a balanced, what's the difference between individuals, population, and the whole culture with respect to this phenomenon?
Yes, it's a reasonable question. Of course, I'm not suggesting that physically the brain has changed enormously since 2,000 years ago. It will have changed a bit because it's always evolving, but it's not that I'm referring to. It's that we use the brain in different ways. We can choose to listen to one part of the brain more than another. And I think that what happens as a society becomes a powerful civilization, a number of things happen. One is that it overreaches itself, either in terms of its territory or its military and economic power. And in doing that, it needs to be able to control, or thinks it needs to be able to control, a vaster, ever vaster panoply of elements in human life. And to do that, it needs to simplify, to roll out, as we say, a bureaucratic system and so forth. So as a civilization becomes too large and overreaches itself, it moves more and more towards a kind of left hemisphere thinking that helps it with the map, the theory, the diagram of life, rather than the actual business of life. And I think the other thing that happens, well, there are many things that happen. I think there are about half a dozen that I refer to in the preface to The Matter with Things. The preface to The Martian is Emissary, and take much further in The Matter with Things. But one is something that the great philosopher A.N. Whitehead said, that a civilization thrives until it overanalyzes itself. And I think that what's happening in our world is we don't really live connected so much to nature. We don't live connected to a spiritual tradition. We don't live connected to our history and culture. Our art has become too intellectualized. It's become too conceptual, not powerful, visceral, and metaphoric in its nature, as most great art is. And so we've been cut loose, and we're all kind of at a loss. And when we try to talk to one another across these spaces, we tend to talk in very theoretical terms. So people talk about a theory of politics, a theory of economics, and a theory of how people behave, and so on. Usually this is inaccurate, oversimple. And so it's that gets us into this frame of mind, because the left hemisphere's message is money for old rope. It's incredibly simple. We're just apes that compete for territory, money, and power. That's the left hemisphere's knowledge. Because, let me put it this way, the left hemisphere's raison d'etre is to make us powerful, to help us grab things. It controls the right hand, which for most of us is the one which we do the grabbing and the manipulating. And it helps us maintain power. But all the rest of the understanding of everything else that humans are capable of, the life of the spirit, the life of morality, of beauty, of goodness, of truth, all these things are somehow left out of this picture and become somehow marginalized or trivialized, as they have done, I believe, in our culture at the moment. And so why I wrote The Matter with Things was because I could see that we all agree there is something that is the matter with things. I mean, very few people think everything's going fine right now. But it's also a notice of the fact that we overvalue matter in the most simple sense. I actually say that materialists are not people who overvalue matter, they're people who undervalue matter, because matter is a very extraordinary thing. Matter is wonderful, but this kind of simple idea of matter is what we tend to overestimate the power of. The consciousness and the spirit, the mind is somehow a secondary secretion of matter, which it cannot be. And that we've made a world up out of things, which is how the left hemisphere puts things together. Whereas I believe the importance in everything lies in relationship, not in what we call the things themselves that are